I would say for leveling specifically that the bow is for sure better than the musket for leveling. Honestly, for the ranged weapons, obviously the biggest downside is the fact that they need ammo. And for the early levels, that's going to hold you back a little bit. But that's not that big of a bottleneck because once you get, I don't know, past like level 10 to 15, you usually don't have a problem making ammo anymore. But it is a bottleneck at the beginning, like early levels. And because of that, I think I'm gonna put it here for now for the bow because it actually has some AoE abilities for like mob clearing and stuff like that. AoE farming. It does decent damage, very decent damage, especially once you start stacking passives. And it's honestly not a bad weapon to level, but because of that ammo bottleneck, it's like low B for me. So yeah, this is specifically just for leveling. Do you agree with that?
Yes. But I've never tried musket, so I don't.
Okay. Yeah, I would say musket. I guess since we're talking about musket, we can go and do that. Musket, I would say is a tier below that for leveling.
Oh, okay.
The best things about musket, because we've done it before too, is like it's really nice when you're like trying to cheese some things when you're like way too low level to do things, and you can like pull a mob from super far away with the musket.
Yeah.
And you can obviously with the trap, like single target, like if you're like fighting like a super powerful mob for like a quest or something like that, you throw down a couple traps, like you can usually burst something down before it even gets to you. So that's what's really nice about the musket with leveling. But the biggest downside is the lack of AoE. The only thing is that bomb.
Yeah.
And it's just
Kind of weak.
for leveling. I think it's below the bow for leveling, but so I think I feel pretty good about that.
Okay.
Fire staff for leveling, I think it's here as well. I think it's honestly slightly below the musket, but not by much. Really, any mage weapon is going to be rough for leveling. One because of mana cost, but all weapons tend to like obviously like get better as you level up. But like specifically like the fire staff and ice gauntlets, it's rough early on, especially if you're running two mage weapons.
I agree.
You agree? Yeah, because I would say like a lot of even like people that plan to do like magic weapons or like casters, a lot of them I'm seeing are like even picking up other weapons just for the sake of leveling until they get to level 30 or 40, and then they'll pick up the fire staff. So I would rank it slightly below the musket, but I would say it's still C tier though. It's not quite a D, but because it does decent damage. Okay, so Great Axe is borderline S. I'm going to keep it here for now, though. This is subject to change after we get them all on the board, but I think it's definitely a high A, though.
Okay.
Like we were talking about, like how most weapons tend to obviously get a lot better, and you can't reach its full potential until you get at least 10 to 15 levels in it. And I would say the bow is also one of those too, but the extreme examples like the fire staff and ice gauntlets, the great axe is like the opposite. Or of course the great axe, like you have your ultimate like bloodlust and stuff like that, like down here on the great axe. And for PvP, it's just completely broken. So of course, like there's a lot of like abilities that the great axe gets good at, but like you pick up a great axe at like level 2 and 3, you're doing like probably the most damage actually out of any other weapon in the game just for leveling. I mean, you can literally cleave mobs. Like
Yeah.
It's got decent sustain too once you get some of these like passives in here, like feed, hunger, critical condition, critical gains. Like there's a lot of decent like life stealing and sustain on the great axe. Great axe is just great overall. It's an A. Yeah, borderline S. Like I said, let's get these all out and then we'll move things around, but I'll keep it there for now at A. Hatchet. I think Hatchet is above Great Axe for leveling, because it pretty much does all the things I just talked about that's good about the Great Axe, but it just does it better. So it has like even better sustain with Berserk, specifically the Berserk passive here of Berserking Refresh. So there's even better sustain. There's mobility, which Great Axe has mobility too. I guess they're probably about tight on that. But as far as leveling goes, I think Hatchet's just slightly better than Great Axe.
Yeah.
Slightly better. So I think I'll put it in S for now. I'll put it in S. Yeah, Hatchet just overall is top 3 in the game for leveling.
I agree.
Do you disagree with anything so far?
No, I don't.
Okay. All right. Ice Gauntlets. I think this is actually going to be the one and only D tier for leveling.
Why is that?
Pretty much the same reasons for the fire stuff that I was talking about earlier. That like it's really rough leveling mage weapons at a low level. one big reason is because of mana costs. Like, you really don't get some good like mana regen and mana passives until you get at a higher level. Then mana becomes less of a problem. But the difference of why Ice Gauntlet is below Fire Staff is because of its ability tree. I always find the Ice Gauntlet to be a little strange, because it's like somewhere in between like doing damage and just CC. Because it does a little less damage than the Fire Staff can for leveling, that's why I'm putting it below that. But that being said, once we talk about like PvE, like higher, just like PvE tier list, it's going to go way up because of like the CC and stuff like that. But just for the sake of leveling, I think it's probably the worst, because when we're talking about leveling, I think we're primarily like talking about like solo leveling. But even if you're leveling like in a group, like a small group, like questing, I don't really think this changes that much, to be honest with you. So okay, life staff.
Yep.
This doesn't require much explanation, but there's
For the people that don't understand.
I mean, one, life staff is the only healing weapon in the game, and that means for leveling, it's going to be very, very, very nice, because you're going to be able to do a lot higher level quests than your current level, because you have a life staff and because you can out heal a lot of the damage that you're taking, especially when you pair the life staff with like a decent like AoE damage weapon like the Hatchet or Great Axe. When you're leveling, this becomes very, 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 very good, and it does decent damage. Like if you like my build I'm doing, like if you get orb protection, and beacon, like you can burst mobs down just like you can do with like a musket. I mean, it's not obviously quite as much damage and not as good as a musket as far as like single target burst damage, but you people be surprised on how much orb protection can damage people, and beacon too. Beacon actually damages as well. We looked it over the other day, and it's about as much damage as a heavy attack is for both of these, and you can instantly like cancel your auto animation. Rapier. This one's interesting. I think I'm going to put it below bow and B tier. It's okay. I would say it's maybe slightly below average for leveling for several reasons. One, it doesn't really have any sustain in its kit at all. Obviously, the big thing with the rapiers is just damage. It just does big damage. The other reason it's slightly below average is, one, there's no sustain. Two, there's not a lot of AoE, and it's very single target based, kind of like the musket is, but it's got decent mobility with like abilities like fletch and evade. There's a way where you can triple roll with evade into fletch. Like you actually get really good movement. For leveling, it's like maybe slightly below average. I don't know. I don't really have a lot of strong opinions on it though.
High learning curve as well.
Yeah, there's a definitely very big learning curve with it, because just like with the bow too, like these two weapons right here, bow and rapier, have the potential to do the most damage in the entire game, more than any other weapon on this list. But the catch is the skill ceiling on it is very high on both of these. So most people will sleep on both of these weapons. My prediction is it won't be until like maybe a month or two after launch, then people will realize how good the bow and rapier are once you actually like get good. Spear's kind of difficult. Let me think about this. Let me bring up this kit for the spear. I think for leveling it's below the rapier.
Why is that?
Mostly, honestly, really just due to the fact that it just has less mobility than it. Honestly, that's it, because I would sit here and probably give you the same reasons of why it's in the tier it is. Like it does great CC, very decent damage, a lot easier to use. So because of like it's a lot easier to use, I'm tempted to bump it up, but I think it's slightly below the rapier for leveling, just due to the fact it does a slightly less damage, even though the CC does make up for it a little bit. So it might be slightly easier to like group up mobs and stuff. For leveling, it's nothing really great. So I think it's slightly below rapier. I think you can make the argument of like moving really any of these around, but this is my personal opinion. I should have put that disclaimer at the beginning, but
yeah.
Sword and shield. I think it's going to go in B tier as well. It's a little bit slow to level with the sword, even if you're spec'd into the left tree here, which I would recommend just for the sake of leveling. Even if you're going to pick up a sword and board as a tank and you plan on going to the mostly defender tree, which you should, I would still like probably pick up Whirling Blade just for the sake of leveling, because that's really your only AoE ability. But even still, it just doesn't do as much damage. There's no mobility. The only sustain you have is Defiant Stance, which is definitely decent sustain, but it's very long cooldown. It's hard to say if it would be above the rapier or spear for leveling.
I feel like it'd take longer to kill mobs compared to the rapier because of the lower damage.
True.
So you'd be going through a lot slower.
You're right. The only thing is it has Whirling Blade, which is an AoE ability, and the rapier doesn't have any. So even though Whirling Blade isn't that great, it's at least some AoE. But I think you're right. I think I would still put it below Rapier. Warhammer, last one. Warhammer for me is kind of in the similar situation as like the Ice Gauntlets. Problems of the Warhammer are similar to the Ice Gauntlets, just not as severe as far as leveling goes. So Warhammer is definitely above Ice Gauntlets for leveling, but I think it would be my first intuition is to put it here. Actually, I think I might have to put it in C tier because I don't think a Warhammer is as good for leveling as like the Rapier or bow is. Yeah, I'm gonna have to put it in like high C for leveling.
Why is that?
It just doesn't do great. Even if you're spec'ing the strength, the damage is like okay. It's not bad, but the auto attacks, like the light and heavy attacks, are like super slow. The one thing I would recommend is if you are leveling with the hammers to get this passive hardened steel, because it adds grit to your heavy attacks. And because they're so slow, you're going to be constantly getting like staggered by mobs of like hitting you and stuff like that. So at least if you have like grit on at least a heavy attack, it'll help a little bit if you're like leveling the hammer. Yeah, I just think it's one of those weapons. Once again, it's like it definitely moves all the way up here in like group scenarios and stuff like that. It shines very well in certain situations, but for leveling, it's like, not that great. I mean, it's okay. It's not bad. It's not great. So it would be on the same level as like the musket fire staff, I think. I don't know. I actually feel pretty good about that tier list right there. What do you think? What's your feedback? Would you change anything around?
No, I agree with it for sure.
Yeah, I'm looking over it. I think so. And I think these three, you could make the argument that like Great Axe still for me is like borderline S, but I still think that the Life Staff and Hatchet, like they just beat the Great Axe slightly in leveling. That's official unprofessional opinion on weapons for leveling. So there it is.